Cultivate. We are happy that you're joining us today for this new episode. And I'm excited because I have a very special friend joining me for today's conversation. I've known her for probably over 10 years. And she has been such a friend in my life through some of the most difficult times, some of the most fun times, all the things you can imagine. We have walked together, and I am just so grateful for her and for the wisdom that she's brought into my life, for everything that she has poured into my life, and for her friendship. Today I have Zori joining me, and I'm so glad that you're here with me. I love you, and I am so grateful for your friendship, for who you are. This is too soon to start crying, but it always happens. It's me. It happens. But I really am grateful because you have been such a pillar in my life in these past 10 years that I've known you. And you have just really, truly been that friend that I can go up to, and not just a friend, but in many times a mom. And I just want to be the kind of friend to other people that you have been to me. And I'm so glad that you're joining me on this conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dee. I'm honored. I mean, this is amazing. Your friendship has meant the world to me. And I know that you have supported me through some crazy times in my life and have never once wavered. And I'm super blessed by your friendship.
Thank you for being with me today, with us today. And, you know, part of that friendship that we've had, I think one of the beautiful things is that we've been able to get to know each other and our stories. And so there's so many memories that we have together that we've built together, but also being able to talk about our past, our lives, you know, our upbringings. And I think that has been a crucial thing for me, because through your story and through what I've known about your life and the things that you have shared, you've brought so much wisdom. And you're someone that anybody can approach, and you will always have not just an encouragement, but when I think about you, I think you have the perfect balance between being a normal person that can give me a normal answer, but at the same time, a spiritual one, a godly one. You know, you're not gonna just hit me across the head with a Bible, but you are gonna give me Jesus, but you're gonna give me real life. So that's a beautiful thing. And amongst many things that we've talked about before, there's one thing in particular that I want us to talk about today, and that's learning to navigate difficult relationships in our lives, especially those relationships that shape our lives. And so I know you had a journey with your mom and your relationship with her that was very particular. And so I just want to hear a little bit from you about that. How was that? You know, what was it particular? How did it shape you and, you know, in your life?
Yes. I think we got to start from the beginning. You know, I feel like I grew up, my mom had a difficult past. My mom is one of 12 brothers and sisters. Wow. So that right there is, and she came from Cuba. My dad was a political prisoner. He fought in the Bay of Pigs. And so she was she came to this country with my brother by herself. There must have been so many difficult things, you know, that also, I'm sure the relationship she had with her mother, being one of 12, was probably not super close either. Yeah. And so, you know, I think my mom had a hard time loving well. I think that I remember as a child, right? Growing up, I had 2 brothers, and I was never that kid, that girly girl. Yeah. You know, my mother had 2 boys and 1 girl. I'm sure there was expectations, you know. I just can think of a million stories of times where I felt that my mother was, I don't know, maybe a little disappointed, like, this is the girl I got, you know.
Meaning because you weren't that
I wasn't that typical girl. I'm sure back then you didn't diagnose ADD, but for sure I had it. I still have it. I was very hyperactive, so I was very hard to control. And so my mother really wanted me to love dolls, to play.
Funny story, you hate them.
Play
You're actually
tea.
terrified of dolls.
Yeah, play with the tea set. And for me, those things were so boring. And so, like, why would I do that? Like, what? I remember having a cousin that lived 2 doors down. And I don't know if you remember, if you ever had the Barbie doll, the head, the Barbie head.
I've seen them.
That
You would paint like
makeup and stuff. And so I remember we both got him. And, a week later, my Barbie was like all over the place. Her hair was everywhere. I lost all the makeup. And I remember my mother took me to my cousin's house and she says, look at her. Look at her Barbie doll. And so I think it began to shape me. I think it began to say something to me as a child that, you're not meeting expectations.
Yeah.
You're not, your cousin comparing.
Or like who you are, it's not good enough.
It's not good enough. I was a kid that loved playing outside. I loved throwing the football. My brother had a BB gun. Oh, I would like beg him, let me shoot it, please, let me shoot it, And my mother would be like, no, you need to like play indoors and you need to. And so those were messages that I got that who you are isn't okay.
Yeah.
Like you should be acting this way or you should be acting that way. And so I think I grew up in that
mindset.
that mindset, in that, and I think my mother did the best she could. She wanted to have a girly girl that, wore, another thing was the little ribbons on your hair. It was like, I don't want ribbons in my hair, all those things that are, that define what a girl is or what,
Yeah.
I just didn't fit that mold.
And as you got older, that maybe the expectation wasn't any longer of like playing with dolls or whatever, but you became a teenager. And how was that like,
So in junior high school, I was in every sport. Whatever sport was there, I signed up for it. I loved sports. So I played softball, I played basketball, I played touch football because that's what I loved.
Yeah.
And my mother never went to one game because she's like, that's something boys do.
Wow.
And it was like, but it's all girls in the team. And so, again, it's that feeling of like, I just always felt like my mom didn't like me.
Would your mom ever tell you that she loved you? Or that she was proud of you?
One time.
That she was proud of you?
That she was proud of me. I can remember it specifically. I dropped out of high school in 10th grade because I hated high school. I hated the building. I hated everything. And so I went to night school. Back then, you could go to night school and do your credits and then graduate.
Diploma,
and I graduated with the, adults that were doing high school. And we had like a little get together at the house. And my mother stopped me and said to me, I'm proud of you. And I can still remember exactly where I was standing. And her saying that to me was like,
You felt validated.
I felt like, wow, I did one thing right. I was like 20 years old at the time.
But the love thing, that was never something she would, like, you don't remember her telling you, I love you.
No, never.
Giving you a hug.
My mother was...
Or what was her way of showing you, like, how did she show love?
Yeah.
If she did.
Yeah. That I was thinking about that because now as a mom, grandmother that I am, I know my mom loved me.
Yeah.
she just had such a difficult time expressing it. So she would express it in maybe cooking a meal because she didn't cook a lot. And I have to say, my mom had mental health issues.
Okay.
So, but it's something that as a kid, you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't,
That doesn't mean anything.
You're not 6 years old
Yeah.
and go, guys, my mom has mental health issues,
Yeah.
or even a teenager, and you don't think. I used to call my mom crazy all the time because that's what I knew she was. But I think she expressed love in where she would sit with me and say things like, I'm your best friend. No one is going to look out for you like I just was like, no,
You
you're
say
not,
your mom was crazy. How was your mom crazy?
She was crazy in that. Yeah, there's just so many mom stories. I don't know which one to pick. She was just crazy. And like if I had a backpack and my mother found a note from the school that said, remember hall passes? Mm-hmm. My mother would be like, where did you get it? And what did you do? And why do you have this? And Mom, it's a hall pass. Now, remember, there's a language barrier too. My mom did not speak English, did not grow up in this country. Mm-hmm. So it would be like, Mom, there's nothing. So I think she also just expected the worst. Like it was always worst case scenario for her, you know? So there's just so many stories. And the thing is that I grew up feeling like I wasn't okay. Like I'm, you know, which led me to some really destructive things. You know, junior high school was very difficult for me. I did every kind of drug you can think of. I wanted to experiment. I hated coming home because my mother created an environment that was walking on eggshells. You never knew how she was going to wake up in the morning. You know, I would say to my mom something simple like, hey, Mom, can we go to the mall tomorrow? Oh, let me see how I feel. It's all how I wake up in the morning. Yeah. And, you know, you kind of absorb a little bit of that, you know.
So would you say you grew up just wanting to or seeking out that validation
for sure
from outside sources, whatever that
was? For sure. And so it led me to hang around. And then when you have someone that's already thinking the worst of you, you're like,
no, whatever.
Let me just do what I do.
Yeah.
And so drugs was a big thing for me. Junior high school, I just wanted to be in an altered state.
Yeah.
I didn't like my reality. And so I was that kid in the corner with all the potheads, you know, because I didn't know how to feel comfortable in my own skin. That takes a long time.
And how, like at that moment you had those feelings, but maybe you couldn't explain them or put them as well as you can now, you know, looking back. How did you come to a place where you understood that for what it was and find healing and or come to a place where you realize that it's not that I'm not enough, I was just different. It's not that I wasn't a good child or I just wasn't meeting someone's expectations, but that's not the reality of who you are. How'd you go from feeling that way to now being on the other side saying, okay, I am loved and there's nothing wrong with me?
Yes. Well, I have to say, first of all, then I got married.
Yeah.
And then I put all those expectations. And I brought all that baggage with me of like never feeling loved enough. And then no matter what, because it's not just enough to be loved, you have to receive that love, you know, and you have to know how. So I think that in my journey, I have learned a lot about resentment. My mom died when she was 63 years old, which was very young.
Yeah.
She...
Were you resentful towards her?
Yes. I was angry. I was always angry. Now, you have to understand, I loved my mother very much. And I would call her every day. I would long for that relationship. I remember having moments where I thought, this is the moment my mom is gonna like say something that I can carry with me the rest of my life.
And it didn't happen.
And it just never did.
Never happened.
It just never did. Even when I got married, there was that moment that I thought, but no. And so my expectations of what a mother is, just like she had expectations for me, I had expectations for her. And I think that I have really worked on what it is to be resentful and how it steals from your life. It's a silent killer.
What did it look like? When you say you were resentful, how did that show up in your everyday life? Like, how did you process that?
First of all, I was very angry. I had a hard time receiving love, because I wasn't used to that.
Yeah.
That, when people would be affectionate with me, I'm like, what's happening? What
is this? Yeah.
Yeah. My father was around, but he never was affectionate either. And so that's something that we grew up very harsh. We were very harsh family. We didn't.
There was no expressions of love. There was no, yeah.
No, there was a lot of anger. There was a lot of, my father was a rager. So he would tear the house apart sometimes. And then other times he was like the best.
How did resentment look like though in your life? Meaning, I feel like there's so many people that function in resentment.
Oh, yeah.
And it's sometimes I feel difficult for you as the person carrying it to recognize it and admit it, right? To say, this is something I'm dealing with. I have seen people whose lives have been, to a certain degree, not stopped, but there's a lid on your life because resentment doesn't allow you to go past it.
Yes.
So at what point do you realize that? Or how do you carry that? How do you live with that? Is it something that you think about all the time? Is it just a reaction to the way someone treats you? Does it come out on specific occasions? Because I think someone might be watching and they might be carrying resentment in their hearts and they might not even know it as that.
Yes. Well, I think that if you would have asked me years ago, are you resentful? I remember doing a Celebrate Recovery program and just really working on myself. And some of the questions were on resentment. I'm like, I'm super I'm not resentful.
Because people think of it sometimes as hatred or as just
or you're carrying it
feeling
on your shoulder, but no. And so I was like, no, I'm like good. Like whatever happened. I'm like, but then there's certain things that trigger it. There's certain things. Feeling unloved was a trigger for me. Wow. I wanted my mother to love me a certain way. And when I didn't receive that love, it made me angry. I think that it came out in my marriage more than anything. Because, I need you to love me a certain way, but I don't know how to communicate it. I just need you to be a mind reader. I need you to do things. And so that, it comes up in every way in your life. You just because you say you're not resentful doesn't mean you're not resentful.
Yeah.
It's something that eats away at you.
Yes.
And it comes out when you're low self-esteem is part of that. All these areas that I just and
I've seen it played out in not reaction, but I feel like you look at life through the lens of that resentment, whether it be that one experience. There's people who live resentful because somebody hurt them. Somebody didn't do something for them. They didn't meet certain expectations. And so now they go through life. And you might be past that. You now look at everything else in life through that lens.
Yeah.
Oh, everybody else must be like this.
Right.
Or they must have done this because of this, because
Yes.
they don't like me, they don't want me, or they have an agenda, or and I think that's where resentment might disguise itself as just, this is the way life is, or people are this way, and we put, not that there's a blame, but we put our issue and our experience
Right.
on other people who just are not to blame.
Exactly right. And I think for me, the answer was really getting to know myself, because I think I always avoided myself. I was that person that couldn't be alone with my thoughts and couldn't.
Why?
And because I feared, being my mother. That I felt like I have crazy thoughts, and I think everybody does, But I think that when you grow up with a mother with mental health issues, you're like, am I crazy too? And I think we all have them. But I think getting to know myself and understanding, hey, because of certain things that have happened to you, you're going to respond in a way. Let's get past this, and it took going to a therapist. It took. I was in Celebrate Recovery for years, and I think it helped me to a point.
Yeah.
And I just needed to be okay in my skin. I think about that saying about I wish I was the weight I was when I thought I was fat.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like that. I wish I would have known myself better when I was younger, and when I was I wasn't as crazy and as broken as I thought. Thinking back now, I didn't have a lot of community.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a lot of people that validated me, that reinforced the good things in my life, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I think hearing you talk about having to recognize those things in the different ways you did, and that's why I think it's so important in life to have those moments where you sit down and you're honest with yourself and you go back to moments of your life that were hurtful. I think we all try to avoid those moments. Like, nobody wants to relive sadness. Nobody wants to relive trauma. Nobody wants to relive, but to a certain degree, it's necessary. Because if you don't address it, it's always going to be this shadow that follows you wherever you go.
Absolutely.
And so you having that time to be honest with yourself, because the reality is that we can fool people. And if we wanted to, we can fool ourselves to a certain degree. But having that moment where you sit down and you're able to face hurt and pain and the ugly things of life, just stare at them in the eyes and say, okay, I have to fix this, I think is what changes that. And I'm just thinking that I had moments in my life where I processed that with you. Where I had to come to a place where, and it wasn't anything huge, major, it wasn't like this giant trauma in my life, but it's even in the little things.
Yes.
It's the little things that eventually over time grow up to take so much space in our lives. And so I did that with you, a lot of it with my dad. That there's things that I already knew I dealt with, but I had to take that moment to really dig in and be honest with myself more. And I did that even with having kids. We processed that together.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that, like, okay, I know I'm going to have kids one day, but I don't know if I want to.
Yeah.
And to anybody else, it could be like, oh, okay, yeah, there's people that don't want to have kids. But I knew deep inside that there was a deeper
issue
behind it. And then coming to a point where I now put it together with my dad and said, okay, this comes from this comes from this fear of this comes with whatever. And so I just would say that it's important for all of us to look back, look in, and address things, because we might be having so many issues now, and it's not about the now, it's about what happened,
back then. Yeah. And we can't live in there. Can't live in the past, and but we have to recognize the things And I can tell you that there are moments in my life that I think to myself, this is from a past. And I have to stop myself and say, no,
Like
this
is
isn't who I
surfacing
am.
because of, okay, yeah.
Because of
that's
things
good.
in the past. And so this isn't who I am anymore. And I have to, because, I think we grow up, right? And we can't be those people either that are like, oh, my mom was crazy. And, I did that for a long time, I'll be honest,
Like
blaming my
pitying
mom
yourself,
for everything. And I wasn't loved right. And I wasn't, and my mom was very different. My mom was, this is crazy, but I was 10 years old, and my mom sat me down and she was having a beer and she says, sit down, I'm gonna teach you how to drink. So when you drink outside, you'll know how to control yourself.
And so you sat down and you had a beer with your
I
mom?
was 10, D. I'm not kidding.
So did you have a beer with your mom?
I had two. I had two.
That is,
And we sat there and we talked. We talked about because, of course, a 10-year-old, imagine 2 beers. I was like, yeah, Mom. Do you love me, Mom? And that's how she
crazy.
could relate to me. And so that began something between us that I remember her coming with a 6-pack of Michelob. I can see it. She would put it down and say, you want to have a beer with me? Now I was 12. I'm like, I'll have 4 beers with you now. And so that began a very unhealthy.
So that was your bonding with your mom, basically.
That was my bonding because we were both at an altered state.
And I'm sure that part of you wanted that and looked forward to that.
Of course.
Because
my mom
you
was nicer when she drank.
Wow.
But here's the problem. You become a little loose lips when you drink, right? So the next day, my mom would say, hey, you said this and this. And so it became very toxic.
Wow.
Very toxic. My mom was also the type of woman that back in the day, you would go to a restaurant, there was a smoking section. I don't know if you remember that. It was a smoking section and you could smoke there. Well, my mother hated the smoking section, even though she was a smoker. So she would go to the non-smoking section, light a cigarette, and I would say, Mom, you can't smoke here. And she would go, really? Light it up and go, I guess I can. Look at me. That's like typical my mom. She was a rule breaker. She did what she did. And,
Having lived like that, right? And when we talk about her expressing affection, because I've seen you with your kids, you are affectionate.
Yes.
You might not be the most hugging, whatever person, but you are affectionate and you
Yes.
do express your love. A lot of people would say, because I didn't experience that and we can hide behind I don't know how to do it, but it must have come to a point where you realized that this is not who you wanted to be. And so how did you go from being someone who did not know how to express her emotions very well because of her mom or her love, did not receive that from her, to now being able to do that with your kids?
Well, with my children, I know how important it is to be affectionate. I knew what I lacked. I knew how much I longed for my mom's affection. I know how much sometimes I just wanted a hug and how she withheld that, And so when my kids were born, I said, if I don't do anything right, but I just love and hug and if my kids know that I love them, I will have accomplished so much more. And so for me, I hug on my kids every chance I get because I know what it feels like to lack that.
Yeah.
So that was easy. And of course, with that comes also some dysfunctions because I loved my kids to death. And sometimes that love was maybe too much, you know? I wanted them to feel supported. I wanted them to do everything I didn't have. And you can't parent like that.
That's an interesting thing because it's such a fine line. Because I see people who maybe they haven't been able to, they recognize what they lacked, but they haven't been able to give that to someone else, even though they know what it felt like for them.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And that I think that working through those feelings and emotions and thinking it the way that you brought it up can possibly help them break that barrier, break that cycle. But that thought of, especially with kids, I want them to have what I didn't have. I think it's beautiful, yet so dangerous.
Oof, yes.
Because we can create monsters. And I think we've seen it. I think we're living in a generation of parents who are doing their best, but in trying their best have completely overdone it, to the point that instead of helping your child, you've harmed them and you've created people who are now entitled.
And enabled.
And now they can't be told anything. It's just, and it's sad because I understand. I want my kids to have what I didn't have. But one thing, and listen, that's not to say that I know what I'm doing. My child's 1.5. So, but one thing that I've always kept in the front of my mind is that while I want her to experience and have things I didn't have, I want her to struggle in a sense.
Yes.
Because there's something valuable that comes from struggle. So yes, while you could have these things, I could give them to you.
Yes.
But I won't. You're going to have to work for some things, because I'm also trying to raise a person who is strong and who knows the value of things. And so it's a fine line.
Yes.
And so when you mention that about even you with your kids, I think it's such a reminder for all of us to be mindful of that, because it is a fine line.
Oh, yes. I'm grateful. You know, at this point in my life, I'm so grateful for my husband, who was the disciplinary, because if it was me, I'm like, it's not that bad. You're good. And Louis was the disciplinary. And I feel like my job was just to love them. And so I had a hard time when that discipline came in, and when, but it's both are equally as important, for sure. And I think that the men that my children are now, no crying, are because of both of us, because of the love they got from me, and also because of the discipline and the rules that were set before them, because it takes both. But yeah, for sure, it takes both.
Yeah. And I think that even us having this conversation and sharing, your story, it's such a reminder and proof that it's in the difficult areas of life, it's those moments that really make us grow as people. Nobody wants them. Like nobody wants to go through hell. Nobody wants to, suffer and have, heartache and disappointment. But I think, what would it be of our lives without the struggle?
No.
Which is why I love having these conversations, because I know there's people watching who can identify with your story. Maybe it's not their mom, maybe it was their father, maybe it was a husband, maybe whatever.
Yes.
But we can identify with those feelings. And I want people to find beauty in the brokenness.
Amen. Yes.
I want people to find beauty in the scars. Like that's part of the reasons why I want to do this, is I want people to look at their scars not as something to be ashamed of or to be regretful or wish it didn't happen, but almost as embracing that and saying, you know what, it's battle wounds, like it happens, but it shows that life goes on and that I'm strong and that I can do these things. And so what part did God and faith play in all of this? How, because I know part of that healing wasn't just you sitting down and going through this, but I know it was a process that God had to take you through. What did that look like practically when it came to faith?
Yeah. It was, for me, it was that surrendering. and that coming to the place where I say, God, I can't carry all this. Resentment ages you.
Yeah.
It's heavy on you. It affects everything in your life. I wanted to be a person, and God has been so faithful to show me a lot of good things about my mom. Things that I think about her strength, and I think about, I wasn't able to do that before. I feel like God has really stripped me of a lot of things in my life that don't serve me anymore, and a lot of that was that overthinking about things, and why this and why that, and harping on things that at the end of the day don't benefit me. And so I feel like God has helped me. There were years that I was on antidepressants because I just couldn't, and God healed me from that. And not that, some people need that, and I'm all for it, but God healed me from those deep depressions I used to get, and things that I used to feel that way and imagine. I would remember my mom lying in bed for days and saying, God, I don't want to be that person.
But it was a process, and it was a hard process.
It was a very hard process. It didn't happen it wasn't one day, God, I surrender it. It's, God, I surrender it today. God, I surrender it today. God, I can't carry this. And it took many years. And the beautiful thing is that I can have memories of my mom now. And, I think it's all how we view things.
Yeah.
And when that resentment is no longer there, I can view my mom, and, my kids and I get together, and I'll say, listen, I have so many stories. And they laugh. They're like, man, I wish I would have met her, because she was, in spite of all her mental illness, in spite of all those things, she was a strong woman that did what she could. My therapist says, some things are just not on the menu for you. We can't know what we don't know. That's Louis' famous saying, You don't know what you don't know. And I think my mother lacked she lacked community. She lacked so many things that.
Which leads me to think, and I think about this often, it's easy to make someone or get all the wrongdoings of a person and define them as that, right? And that is not to take away the truth of the pain and hurt people go through, because there are people who have gone through some real messed up things, traumatic things in their lives. And so it's not to justify the person, but I think what helps healing and what helps get rid of that resentment is when we look at people like the way you've been describing. Sometimes it's not that people are out to destroy your life, or it's not that they purposely wanted to harm you. Is that they themselves have experienced certain things that have shaped them into who they are, and that's all they can do, that's all they can give. And so it's not often a personal thing, like this didn't happen to you because it's Zori and she's not good enough. This happened to you because your mom had issues she didn't know how to deal with. And she just did what she could. And so I think looking at people and at situations from that perspective helps us heal, because we understand it's not always personal. No. It's just the way life is sometimes. And
hurt people.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And she didn't know better.
Yeah.
She did the best that she could. And I kind of hate that saying a little bit, because I don't want that to be my standard.
Well, because you could have said that. Your kids could have said that about you.
Yeah.
But you made it a point not to repeat a cycle. Yeah. And so, while yes, there's this side to it, there's also a responsibility that I think we have as human beings to say, I'm not repeating this.
Right.
I'm not doing this again. Right. I'm not going to carry a cycle. And I feel that people can easily fall into this victim mentality.
Oh, yeah.
because it's easy to just find yourself comfortable in, well, this happened to me,
yeah.
and not to take away the pain and the hurt and the reality of people's situations, but to say there is more.
Yes.
You don't have to live as a victim.
You can get stuck there.
Yeah. And you've seen that. You've worked with a lot of people and you've seen that.
Yes.
So what would you say to the person who might be listening today and might be in a place where they need to rethink their lives? They need to look back and be honest with themselves and begin to make changes because they feel victimized, or they feel stuck, or they feel like they're just in that place of bitterness and unable to move forward.
Yeah. I think the first thing is forgiveness. I think you got to forgive. You know, I had to forgive my mom, not once, many times.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. How do you? Because I feel like sometimes people think forgiveness is a
one-time thing.
A magic little,
yeah.
You're never going to think about this again.
Yeah, no. It was forgiveness. And every time I would feel resentful, I'd say, God, this is yours. I forgive, and I forgive. And you have to do it 1,000,000 times sometimes.
Yeah.
I think that for me, having someone to talk to, having community, being able, you know, the Bible talks about confessing our sins to one another. Yeah. And I think it's also just being able to express yourself and shedding light on situations that in your mind can become monsters. And once you say them, they're like, okay, that...
So what's a practical way that someone can start today, you would say, to start a process towards healing and towards moving forward? Like, what's a practical way that I can start right now?
I think you need to bring it to God, first of all. Bring it to God and really surrender it. Say, God, I can't carry it anymore. This is yours to carry. And then, if you can get a therapist, if you can join a group, if you can be part of a connect group, people that you can, a safe space where you can talk and you can, and become self-aware. When you have those moments of anger, say, why? Why am I angry? Why is anger the only emotion that I can feel?
Yeah.
And what am I really feeling? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling disappointed? Am I feeling... And I think that's a good beginning.
Yeah.
But it is a process, and we need help.
Yeah.
We can't do it alone.
And I think that's one of the things that helped me in certain situations is that I began to question everything. If I had a feeling, if I had a thought, I would go, why? And sometimes you're like, why? I mean, why? Because that's just... And it's like, no sit on that for a little bit.
Yeah.
And think why. And then after I had an answer for that, then I would go, okay, why? And it would take me a long time. And sometimes it's even that part where you have to be honest with yourself and you don't want to because you don't want to go there.
Right.
You're like, I don't want to keep answering because I don't want to get to where I know I'm going. But it's needed.
Yes.
And it's necessary to do it. And I love that community.
Yes.
I feel like community continues to be the center point of it because it does help you. It does help you to just talk to someone, share a story, you know. Just the fact that we're doing the podcast is for that reason. Like there's people who are going to listen and maybe their stories are not exactly the same, but they can say, well, that's where I've been. That's what I've experienced, and find hope and know that there's more on the other side, and that God can heal and God can do things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am blessed to have a community, to have friends, be part of connect groups, be part of things that enrich my life.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, we can get stuck. And the worst thing in life is to get stuck. We need to be growing. We need to be changing, you know.
Yes.
We need to be evolving, because if not, we get old.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Bible talks about renewing our minds.
Yes.
And it sounds pretty.
Yeah.
It sounds like a nice concept.
But it's tough.
But it's difficult. It's a process. So it's being not afraid of the process. Is what do you want more? Do you want to stay there? Or do you really, really want to move forward
Absolutely.
with your life?
Absolutely. I have thought about all the changes that God has made in my life, and I stand in awe, you know, because I have stuck to community, to seeing someone, to expressing myself, because I'm a person that there are things I've been through in my life I didn't talk about till I was 40.
Yeah. And that there's someone for everyone. And what I mean by that is we all express ourselves differently. And so we all need different people to express certain things too.
Yes.
Like you and I are very similar in the sense of like, we're not very polished and pretty in our answers. Like I just need to hear like this and I'm not gonna, pat you in the back. But that's how we are. There might be someone who needs that, and there is someone for that person to talk to. So, you
gotta find your person.
You gotta find your person, and you will, and you can. And
absolutely,
ultimately, God gives you the power to do these things, and it's you wanting it and seeking God and asking for help.
And that's the center of it all, really, because we can't do it by ourselves. First of all, we need God, and if God is not in the center of it, we don't have purpose to change. You got to really want those changes in your life too,
I was thinking, we talk about these things and resentment and looking back at our past and navigating all these things. And I feel like if you're listening to this and you think this has nothing to do with you, then it does. Then it does. Because other people were like, okay, let me consider, let me think, let me whatever. So I would just encourage people to take a moment, maybe this week, maybe within the next month, and sit down with themselves and begin a process.
Sit with yourself. That's such a
scary.
Big thing.
It is.
Just to sit with yourself and your thoughts and your...
Yeah, it can be challenging.
We very seldomly do that, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's very necessary.
And it's necessary.
Well, our lives are filled with noise. And sometimes there's people who cannot sit in silence with just themselves for a moment. And that's also a good place to start.
That's why we go through that social media and we're
trying to fill our lives with whatever we can to keep us going and entertaining other things. Well, thank you for joining me today and for sharing some of your story. I know you have much more stories to share, many different things, and we'll have you back and talk about more things. But I appreciate you. I love you. I've learned so much from you.
I love you to death.
I love you. And for all of those of you that are watching, I hope that you're encouraged today. And if you take anything with you today, is that there's a process you can start today. Whether it's resentment you're dealing with, it might be hurt from the past, it might be disappointment, any type of pain, that you can start today a healing process with the help of God and community around you. And so I would encourage you, like we talked about today, take a moment this week, spend time with God. God isn't afraid of your feelings. He isn't afraid of your emotions. He wants to hear you come to him and tell him how you feel, whether it's anger, whether it's sadness, disappointment, whatever it is, and just bring that to him. And then sit down with yourself and begin to evaluate the areas of your life where you know that there's some healing, that there's some changes that need to take place, and start there, because God is a God that wants to heal you. And there's a community of people around you that will come around and embrace you. And actually, I would say this, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave us a comment if you need to find community. If you're here in Miami or wherever you are, if you want to leave us a comment and say, hey, I would love to find community. We would love to connect you with someone, maybe a group of people that you can join and help you in this journey. So thank you for watching today. We'll see you next time.